Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Zachary Renfro, and welcome to How to Write College Forum Post More Better. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about some tips and tricks that I use to do high quality college forum post in an online format. If you're an online student, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Usually once or twice a week, you have a forum assignment that you have to do in which you will respond to some topic and then you will, have to respond to a certain number of classmates. So to help you with this, I'm going to show you my tried and true method, which is the IBAC essay format. Now, I use this method for all my academic writing and for all my, personal writing, more or less. It's a really great format. I learned it years ago and it really helps me. And I'm going to show you an example of how different my writing was before I learned this format versus after I learned this format, right? So what does IBAC stand for? It means introduction, background, analysis, conclusion. As you can see on the slide, I've got it color coded. I'm not going to, read through all of it. You can read through it yourself. You can pause the video if you like. But basically, if you use this format, you're going to tell the reader what it is you're going to talk about. You're going to explain all the background. You're going to give your analysis, that's the meat of the paper, and then you're going to wrap it up with a conclusion, right? So let me show you how one of my forum posts looked years ago, back when I took Philosophy 200 and had to do a forum. So here it is. The topic of the forum was psychological egoism, and we were examining that in relation to Plato's Republic, right? As you can see, I've color coded it, but this is pretty much the exact text that I turned in when I was an undergrad, right? This was way back in July of 2012, 13 years ago. Thankfully, I still had it. But we see I have an introduction, and then in the body, I explain a little bit of the background. Then I have an analysis, but I've got no conclusion. And if you read this, you can pause it and read it. I'm not going to read it for you, but it's super cringy and it's super like awkward. My style of writing at that time, is almost like I was writing for like some kind of gossip mag, like 10 tips to, find better fashion or something like that, right? It's a very personal style of writing. And I wrote exactly how I speak, and I still do that. I still write, for the most part, how I speak. The only difference is now I've spent 11 years in school, and the way that I talk has pretty much been ruined. I talk in a way that sounds like a robot having a seizure sometimes. So, you know, it leads to a type of writing that fits a good in an academic purpose, but may not be so enjoyable to read for the regular person, right? Whereas this that I posted all those years ago is very enjoyable, right? So for the introduction, I use kind of an open tone. I cracked open my copy of Plato's Republic. You know, um, I go straight into analyzing it, not really taking the time to explain why I'm doing it or explain what's going on. And let's compare that to a forum post that I did a few years later, still at the same school, still at AMU. And at this point, I had learned the IBAC format. So this is a, a forum post. The topic of the post was explain a philosopher, and it gave us some choices. So I chose George Friedrich Hegel, and basically I had to explain the background of them, and it more or less follows the IBAC format. Got the introduction. Who am I talking about? George Hegel. Um, got some background, what's Hegel talking about? Got some light analysis, and then got some conclusion talking about Hegel's philosophy, right? Then, if we compare that to how I would write a paper now, we see it's a bit different, how I do a forum post now. So this is how I would do a forum post now, and this is for a class that I'm teaching, Philosophy 200, the same one I took all those years ago. And, this is the week one, so we have to introduce ourselves and talk about the topic, which is ethical relativism. So let's dig into this a little bit. So my first part, my introduction, it's very clear. This forum post, I'm going to introduce myself, examine the course objective, and analyze ethical realism, right? So I'm telling the reader right up front what I'm going to do. Then I get into the background. Who am I? I'm Dr. Zach Renfro. My research relates to business ethics, yada, yada, yada. And then I get into the course objective, which is something else we have to analyze. And I talk about that. And then that leads me into ethical relativism. Now, you'll notice when I wrote this, I didn't run it through Grammarly. I I gave it a quick read through, but there's probably errors, right? So I wrote this the same way now that I would have all those years ago back in, you know, 2014. The only difference is now that I know a little bit more, right? So my writing's just coming straight off the cuff is a little bit better. But, I've got these nice transitions. I use words like disparate, like right up here, disparate topics. And I use that in regular conversation. But again, that's because I've been in college 11 years and, my whole style of speaking is ruined, right? Then I move on to the analysis, the meat of it. I've got 3 paragraphs here talking about different types of ethical relativism. And this is one of those things where as you get further along in your educational journey and as you learn more, you got to kind of dial it in because as I was writing this, I had to stop myself, right? Because I was going to write up like a 10-page analysis on ethical relativism. And I realized, whoa, I don't need to do this for this, example paper, which I'm going to be showing off in a video, right? So I have my analysis. I talk about ethical relativism. And I get to the main part is, do I think ethical relativism can be good for helping us make moral decisions? And I say no, and I explain my reasoning. And then I tie it all together in a conclusion, right? Um, and the reason I tie it together in a conclusion is that way the reader knows, like, these are all the things I covered. This is why they're important. This is what matters about them. Then, of course, I got my sources down here. Now, you'll notice, when you look at every single one of my forum posts, I start out with dear classmates, end with sincerely, have my sources afterwards, right? So this is the one from 2012, right? 13 years ago, I did the same thing. 2016, doing the same thing. Dear classmates, sincerely, sources. Then the one I wrote last night, dear classmates, sincerely, and then sources. And you might be asking yourself, why am I making these forum posts seem like it's a letter, right? Like who does that? That's a crazy thing to do. Well, I'll tell you the reason why I do it. I do it because it makes the forum posts seem more human. It reminds me as I'm writing these that hopefully other people will be reading them, responding to them, thinking about them, right? Hopefully it'll, you know, get them into it. And, also it lets me practice writing a letter. I know that seems a little old fashioned, but in our modern times, people don't really know how to write a letter. I'm not even sure how to write a letter. So this gives me good practice on, if I'm writing a letter, I'm writing an email, I'm sending a message, how do I make sure that I'm being polite? How do I make sure that it, makes sense? But let me say, going all the way back to the beginning, you know, as a professor, if I got this post right here, the one that I wrote in 2012, the rambly, cringy one that's not got very good structure, right? I would still be happy to get it. I would love it, and I'll tell you why. Because when I see this post, and you can pause it and read through it if you want, but when I see this post, I know that it was not written by ChatGPT. ChatGPT writes better than this. ChatGPT is smarter than this, right? So I know that this was written by a real human because at the end of the day, the reason that any professor is teaching is to help you learn. I know ChatGPT knows all this stuff. ChatGPT knows a lot more than I do. So there's no point in me grading or even looking at something done by ChatGPT because I know the quality of ChatGPT's stuff is going to be fine, right? So let me kind of tie this all together in one go. As a student, I think it's really important that from stem to stern, from beginning to end, you write your forum post. And I think that is because by doing that, you will learn more about the topic than if you just feed it into ChatGPT. And my preference is, as a professor, I would prefer if you didn't use ChatGPT at all. I would prefer if you didn't use any sort of AI at all. I mean, honestly, I would even avoid Grammarly, right? Because at the end of the day, the goal is for you to learn how to do it better. And these tools, and I know they're being used in business and I know they're being used out in society, but they're not helping you. The same way that when you're learning math as a child, you need to learn your times tables. You need to learn how to do addition and subtraction. You need to learn how to carry, and all those things. You need to learn how to do long division, right? Not because we don't have calculators. We do have calculators, but for your own benefit. That way you know how to do these things if you're ever in a situation where one, you need to use it and you don't have some sort of technology, and then two, to allow you to better understand the way that all these things fit together. And philosophy is no different, college forum posts are no different. That you will learn something by writing this out, right? Because your brain, when it's in thinking mode, is different than when you're in writing mode, and you'll find that as you're writing things down, you'll suddenly come to new conclusions or new epiphanies as you write them. You'll be like, oh, well, now that I've written this down, this makes sense, right? And if you have AI, if you have ChatGPT, if you have some sort of thing stepping in between you and that learning process, then at the end of the day, it's going to make you weaker, it's going to make you stupider, and it's going to make it harder for you to do the things you need to do. Because the world out there, outside of college, this real life world, it's tough and it sucks. And you need to develop these skills of thinking and writing and analyzing as best you can without the use of this AI aid. Because at the end of the day, when AI is doing all your thinking for you, when it's doing all your writing for you, what it's basically doing is making you weaker. It's going to cause your skills to atrophy. You will get weaker and weaker over time until suddenly you can't focus without the AI. You can't think without the AI. It's a crutch. And I don't want you as a student or as a person to be put in a situation where you're made weaker because of a poor academic decision. So that's my 2 cents. That's my little soapbox on AI. Um, and going back to this Phil 200 that I wrote back in 2012, back when I was young and dumb. Maybe I'm still dumb, but I'm older now. Back when I was young and dumb, this will let you pass a class, right? This right here, this ranty, cringy paper will pass the class, right? And when I go forward a couple of years, my writing's gotten better. I've learned a little bit more. I passed the class. I got pretty good grades, right? And the reason I did is because I kept practicing my writing. I kept reading. I kept trying to learn. At the time, there was no AI, but there were services you could turn to basically help you cheat. I didn't do that. I did it myself, and the result was it made me stronger over time and made it to where now I can write something like this in an hour or two, and it's a pretty strong forum post, right? Like if I had to turn this in, you know, to any college, I would get high marks for it because it's well put together, it's logical, it's got a format, right? Now, if you stuck together till the end, I'm going to give you a little bonus tip, and I hope that this will really help you. The IBAC format is really, really great for academic papers. Now, let me show you one that I wrote. This was back in 2016. This was for the same class that I had the Hegel post for. And this is an academic paper. It's 7 pages, 1,900 words. And you see I follow the same format, introduction. And then I literally have a section, background, right? I've got my background section. And it goes on explaining all the background. Then analysis, right? I mean, I'm analyzing the topic. Then conclusion. And then, works cited, sources, whatever you want to call them. Some citation sources call them bibliography, whatever it is. You can use the same format, and I use the same format all the way into grad school, all the way to the end of my PhD. It's a great format. In fact, I use the same format for my doctoral dissertation. I had to add a couple sections. I had to add methodology. I had to add literature review, but those fit into my background. So I had introduction, background, literature review, methodology, analysis, conclusion, spread across, 210 pages. But it's a good format and it helps you. And what I always did is I'd set up and make me a little template where I'd have, professors' names, title, and then I'd have my sections already pre-cut: background, analysis, conclusion, um, sources, right? That way, for me as a student, it was so easy to just hop straight in, start writing, and get it done. And you can even do something similar with your forum post. I didn't I didn't really do a template for my forum post just because like there wasn't really any need to, because typically your forum posts are only going to be 200 to 500 words, something like that. But it is helpful. It is really helpful. So, wrapping this all up, let me say you can do this. If you're nervous about your writing, don't be. All that matters is that you try your best, you try and learn as much as you can, and you try and take the material to heart. Because at the end of the day, that's why you're in college. It's not just for some piece of paper. If you're just in college just for a piece of paper, then you're wasting your time. You need to be in college to learn and develop yourself. And I know that's kind of an oddball perspective in our modern society that's so focused on credentials, but it has to be about learning, because if it's just about getting that piece of paper, then you'll find at the end of it that piece of paper isn't going to help you as much as what you thought. Those are my closing thoughts. In conclusion, we covered the IBAC format. We talked about how to use it in a forum post. We talked about how to use it in a paper. And I really appreciate you watching this video. Thank you so much for your time, and you have a wonderful day.